I survived 200 days in the ultimate fantasy mod pack. Roguelike Adventures and Dungeons is a massive mod pack that turns Minecraft into a brutal RPG. In these days, my goals are simple. First, I want to be an archmage and make powerful spells. Then I want to slay a bunch of tier 5 dragons. After that, most importantly, I want to complete as many side quests as possible in the mod pack. Day 101, I started these days by trying to get into these dread dungeons. Luckily, this frozen lake finally spawned some of the dread mobs. I fought a bunch of thralls and ghouls and eventually a lich spawned. It actually ended up taking a bit, but after defeating a ton of these guys, I got 2 keys. I used one of them to open up this dread dungeon and started clearing the area. This place had a crazy spawn rate and tons of enchanted mobs as well. As I made my way towards the second floor, I was taking a bunch of damage, so I had to retreat really quick. I then managed to clear the first 2 areas and grabbed all the chests, which had tons of dragon materials. Then in the last huge area, I was basically just fighting these mobs on the staircase forever. Luckily, I had this projectile break spell, so I broke a bunch of spawners, but then a legendary mob froze me and almost killed me, so I had to teleport back home. While I was here, I extended my beacon by adding another layer and put on strength 2. The next morning, I went back into the dread dungeon and tried to clear it out for good. It was a lot more clear now, so I could break most of the spawners in the final area. Eventually, my shield broke, so I had to make an extra one. But after that little debacle, I was able to go around and break more spawners. This ended up doing tons of damage to me, so I had to hide out on the staircase for a bit again. Finally, this dungeon was cleared and I could grab these ice dragon forge blocks. Before leaving, I cleared out all the chests in here as well and grabbed my quest rewards. As soon as I came home, I repaired my relics and combined these 2 baubles to make a horseshoe balloon bauble. I also had a few enchanted gear which I scrapped and put the books into the library. I actually spent the whole night scrapping and salvaging all these gears. As soon as morning hit, I made 1 draconic end shelf and increased the total power of my enchantment area. Then I rolled some enchants on this new bow and decided I wanted mending, so I hopped into the end dimension to go looking for end structures. First, I found this end pyramid which had some unbelievable amount of loot in each chest, but no mending gear. Before moving on, I opened these ender buddy cards and put them into the binder. Along my travels, I found this tower looking structure which had some really decent loot. I then also found one of these stalwart boss structures which needed a nether shard to activate it, but I didn't know about that just yet. Day 104, I put all these books away, prayed on the gravestones, and hopped into the nether. I was looking for the stalwart dungeon again, and along the way I fought through this bastion which had an elite piglin brute. Once that dude was taken care of, I looted the chest, and as I left, I actually took the wrong turn. Since it would take me forever to go around, I just decided to come back home. I then decided to explore some areas that I hadn't seen yet and found a dragon corpse. Past that, I slaughtered a fire dragon and harvested its blood. Once that was done, I raided a wizard's tower which gave me more affixes and rare gear. Then I cleaned out this battle tower which had tons of iron and gold blocks. Later that night, I broke into a giant pyramid and looted the main chest. Also in this area, I finally found one of those normal goddess statues and traded in tons of my spirit orbs. Of course, I also picked that up as well. Before those nights ended, I raided 2 structures. The first one was a pirate ship which had tons of illagers. The loot room in here was really good though. After that, I found this little bone structure which just had 1 spawner. With all of that done, I came home to put this regular and cursed statue side by side. Day 105 to day 106, I updated the mod pack and tons of things were changed. First, Spice of Life was gone, so most of my extra hearts were also gone. This meant that food diversity wasn't important anymore. I also grabbed tons of new quest rewards as well. I got these emblems for my specializations which I forgot to put on for a while. To complete more quests, I went through this upgrade tree of backpacks and worked my way up to another diamond backpack. I also noticed the entire coin shop changed, so I was very glad I got this Ankh charm before the update. For this new food mod, I just had cooked mutton, carrots, and apples in my backpack to start off. Then to make sure I had enough protein, I put some fences down and used these cow spawn eggs. The next morning, I enchanted a bunch of tomes and put them into the library. Next up, I used my gold coins for some of these choice rewards. I grabbed a bunch of golden carrots and these randomite ores. Before mining all the ores, I tried to get fortune on the pack soul. Then I actually decided to extract some affixes as well. I then noticed that I had 61 copper coins, which I ended up using on all these loot crates. I completely forgot that there was a new option to put the coins in bulk. These loot crates gave me tons of random items. I also had some iron coins which I used on more loot crates and the monster coins on gathering levels. Finally, I put fortune 3 on the paxel and mined the randomite ores. With all that done, I upgraded this gold stack upgrade to diamond in my backpack and then went into the undergarden. In here, I flew up very high, added fortune on my break spell, and mined as many diamond ores as I could. I manually mined a bunch as well, and I thought that they removed vein mining for now, so I didn't really use it. Now that I had tons more diamonds, I decided to come back home. As soon as I came back, I looked through a ton of enchantments and decided to put mana boost and regen on my chestplate and boots. With that being done, I picked up some raw beef and decided to go and explore. I found this really cool prairies biome and also hopped into this roguelike dungeon. Things were going pretty smooth at first, but one of these rooms ended up being packed with mobs and they did tons of damage to me. Once I cleared those sections out, I started moving lower and lower. With these break spells, I was able to clear out rooms before I even got into them. I ended up taking out 200 zombies as well, which unlocked more quest rewards, and I made it to the final rooms. Since the difficulty had increased, most of the mobs I've been seeing were enchanted, and because of that, I spent a long time on one floor just clearing out these guys. After taking care of those zombies, I ran through the final floor, looting all the chests, and ended up in a boss chamber. These bosses are super important because they drop insane gear that you can strip the affixes from. This guy specifically was a tank, and the armor it dropped was an ancient level affix. Since all that was cleared, I came home and redeemed my quest reward for 200 zombies, which leveled my gathering up. Then, since I had so many new pieces of armor, I started scrapping a bunch of them. That gave me tons of very important enchants. Once that was done, I used a bunch of levels to enchant these weapon tomes as well. I also made to stock up my backpack with different types of food and replace these regular bookshelf corners with hell shelves. Later that night, I put stable footing on my boots and started making these end fibers. Those were just to make this archmage armor, which just looked even cooler. This gave me tons of quest rewards, and my next goal was to wait for souls to hit the graveyard so I could scrap my old armor. For now, I just put an extra grave down and set this armor aside. Day 110 to day 112, I made the biggest mistake I possibly could. First of all, I didn't know that you could just make an obsidian shield, so I wanted to summon a wither and try to get it through a diamond coin. I quickly gathered 3 wither skeleton skulls using my scythe and then went back to the area I summoned all the past withers. Now here was the giant mistake. This wither was enchanted. It said Arctic, but I'm pretty sure it was also lively, which meant that it kept regenerating its own health. Not only was this dude an absolute tank, his little minions also happened to be enchanted as well, and they did even more damage than the wither itself. I was able to get away from the minions, but the wither kept regenerating and lagged the game like crazy every time I did the super attack. I tried my hardest for a bit, but after almost dying, I magic mirrored back home. Trust me though, this fight gets significantly worse. I came back and put tons of amplify on the harm spell, which I thought would help. It didn't, and this wither destroyed even more of this little area I was in. So for the rest of these days, I basically magic mirrored when I was in trouble and kept attacking this wither over and over again. This was an actual nightmare. I ended up having to enchant a whole new sword with smite on it to just take down more than a quarter of its health. It took forever and almost broke me, but I finally got this wither out, and the destruction it left was pretty incredible. From its minions, I got a bunch of enchanted books, and I also had to take a lot of my relics off since they all almost broke. The funniest thing is that even with the nether star, it needs 2 submissions now, so I was still 3 levels shy of getting a diamond coin. Day 113 to day 114, all of my levels were gone, and I had to reorganize my baubles and relics. Once that was done, I looked at some of these structures around my base to see if there were mobs around. I found a single spawner, which helped a bit, and past that I found a cyclops den, and since I had some arrows, I was able to level up my archery quite a bit just hitting the cyclops. Once the arrows ran out, I switched to my spells and I was able to take this big dude out. I made sure to slaughter the sheep here for mutton as well. Finally, I found a structure, and it was one of those redstone airships. From the first 2 floors alone, I was able to get a ton of XP, but the real loot was at the top floor. Here, I got some really good loot and tons more XP from the enchanted mobs. I was almost at 100 levels. The next structure I jumped into was this jungle pyramid, and this place was jam-packed with silverfish. At one point, there were so many of them, I was actually pretty scared I was gonna die. It also connected to a zombie dungeon as well, but by staying about 1 block above them, I was able to take them out pretty easily, and also inside some of these chests were tomes that gave me a ton of levels. So I think this place might have been bugged out since more and more silverfish kept spawning, even after I cleared the structure. Nonetheless, I got my diamond coin, and of course, because I had horrible luck, the obsidian shield was no longer part of the rewards. I settled for the power glove, which apparently increases damage. After that, I just held my remote in my hotbar so that I could still use 2 charm slots. Also, since I didn't have any more levels in my backpack, I needed to go out and search for structure to grind out mobs. Exploring these different biomes gave me a bunch of XP, and I learned that vein mining still works, but just for ores. Eventually, through this cave, I went inside a little dungeon, There was nothing too scary in here aside from this legendary skeleton. I kept my distance though and I was able to take it out. I had a few extra levels now which actually repaired all of my armor finally. With all that done, I set down a few more graves and put on this Archmage armor as a cosmetic. While waiting for a soul to hit the graves, I actually inscribed a key and used it on this portal. This dungeon was very similar to the ones I was in before, and even after looking a bunch of stuff up, I still couldn't figure out some of these other puzzles. The rooms that I could finish though had some really good loot. I ended up getting a bunch of new keys as well that I needed to check out. The first one I checked out was one called Heaven of Order, and once again, all the rooms are pretty similar. In one of the chests, I got a new item from one of the new mods. These were called capsules, and sometimes they have a whole entire structure in them, or just some other cool stuff. There was also a really cool wither skeleton room where you could just farm skulls, but I'm pretty traumatized at this point. In one of the final rooms, I got a green key, but that was for upgraded portals, which I didn't have the items for just yet. Oh yeah, so with this new food mod, you could also engorge yourself, so randomly I get slowness sometimes. Since I was back home, I activated that capsule and tons of ores spawned. I mined all of them, and it just happened to be a one-time thing. After that, I sped through another dungeon and this one happened to be nether themed. There was also a mimic who dropped 2 power gloves. All of that gave me a bunch of quest rewards as well. Day 116 to day 117, next to my base, I started planning out how to place these Dragon Forge items down. I had enough space to make like a third of the Dragon Forge. Once that was done, I swapped back to using this dragon scale armor cosmetically and placed down a dragon bone fence to see if my dragon would fit. I had to move the forge back 1 block, and since I re-equipped my netherite backpack, I actually unlocked the quest reward for it, which gave me another diamond coin. This one I spent on a modifier book, which was a complete waste. On the bright side, I got the mending off of these leggings and put it in the library. Then I opened these spare buddy card sets, and when I opened the last end card, I actually managed to complete the whole end set. So this end set medal gives you resistance permanently instead of speed like the base set. I also had a bunch of these Vitae 5 books, which I put on my helmet to increase my hearts. With these new hearts, I decided to go out and explore. I ended up fighting through a pillager tower and finally found something I really needed. Inside of this beehive was a whole other dimension that I got into using an ender pearl. This place was called a Bumble Zone, and I was very lucky that I could fly, otherwise I'd be getting stuck all the time. The first thing I did here was grab all these honey blocks, and that actually ended up waking all of these bees up. And these bees were super strong and angry. With those honey blocks, I got tons of bottles of honey, which I used to make a bucket of honey, and that helped me tame this thing called the Behemoth. I collected my quest reward, saddled up, and rode this thing. Now this guy was super slow, so eventually I had to abandon it to explore the rest of the area. In here, I picked up some sugar water to complete some quest rewards, and then I grabbed these honey crystal shards. With those, I could actually make a honey crystal shield. I explored for a bit more, but I really couldn't find anything else. So I came back home and saw that I had this cool item that I could equip on my body slot. Once that was equipped, I set out to explore again, and some of these newer chunks were really buggy because of the updates. I ended up running through another pillager structure and fought this boss mob and its entire group of mobs. The next morning, I made my way into another roguelike dungeon, and it was connected to a boss chamber. After taking that guy out, I went on to clear the rest of the roguelike dungeon. Maybe it was the update again, but a lot of these roguelikes now look way more ruined. On one of the lower floors, I fought another one of those boss mobs who dropped a really nice helmet. Then after I took a lot of the levels from these tomes, I almost died to this elite zombie, so I had to come back home. As soon as I came back, I equipped this cobalt shield and these cat slippers to scare away creepers. Once that was done, I actually used some of these capsules, and one of them was for an uncommon well, which just ended up building a well for me. So I made sure to light that up and filled it with water. With that being done, I extracted more affixes and used my dragon scales to make a few more dragon forge blocks. Day 119, as I was looking for more dread dungeons, I stumbled into a village that I had started a raid in from a while ago. I decided to take this raid out, and I just started attacking the pillagers. Most of the guys in the first wave were just normal types of pillagers. The second wave though immediately doubled the spawn and also spawned this black iron golem, which was just huge and tanky. Once that dude was gone, I moved on to the next wave, and here I managed to take out this illager general, and now there was also a ravager attacking me as well. The last dudes were these squad wall golems, and the Illager King, both of which were pretty easy to take out. For some reason the raid was still going on, but I just could not find the last few mobs, so I decided to just move on. I made my way into this dread dungeon, which was right next to a village, and cleared most of the beginning floors. Then an elite dread beast almost killed me, so I had to come back home quickly. Here I grabbed all my quest rewards that I got from the raid, and noticed one grave had a soul. After that I saw a recipe for a pretty good food item, so I grabbed tons of buckets of milk and made a bunch of these things called stuffed potatoes, which were very nutrient dense. I managed to only get like 10 of them. The next morning I went back into the dread dungeon finally, and I was able to throw a bunch of light around. Once I got into the final rooms, I lit it up quickly and then ran around trying to break all these spawners. That one body item I had equipped was awesome since it has the chance to just get rid of damage sometimes. With this dungeon cleared, I grabbed the forge blocks from the center, looted the rest of the chests, and came home. I happened to be missing just one more aperture and the core. With that done, I went out to explore and noticed a bunch of charred blocks in this random little area. Then from the ground a fire dragon sprung up and started attacking me. It surprised me for a little bit, but I was able to just land a bunch of melee hits on this dragon and eventually take it out right on top of its own nest. For this guy, I just took its scale, and I then noticed that I had a bunch of bottles of XP that I just used. As I moved along, I picked up Bad Omen again and stumbled into this mushroom structure. These guys were super easy to take out and they had tons of food in their chests. After that, I fought another boss mob and then came home to make a glyph of Dispel. For some reason, this thing just did not work on the Bad Omen effect. Day 121, my storage system had way too many items, so I just dumped a bunch of items into this lava pool. Then I decided to expand the chest room as well with 2 more layers of double chests. I put the finishing touches in and went out to explore once again. I ended up in another jungle pyramid, and this time I was super careful and managed to not get tons of silverfish to spawn. The chests in here were really nice, and on the way out I actually found another wizard's tower which had even more affix books and gear. Past that I found a huge Illager structure. This place had a loot room in the center being guarded by a black iron golem. I took the golem out, removed some of these obsidian blocks, and then went down to kill these pillagers. Once they were all taken care of, I was able to loot every single one of the chests in here, and they were all stacked. I ended the night by activating this waystone nearby and coming back home. Day 122 to day 123, I flew around these snowy regions looking for ice dragons to fill out the dragon forge. I was spamming this eye for a pretty long time, through a bunch of different biomes, and it still didn't catch any dragons. In the meantime, I grabbed everything I could from these structures in this village. I also had an extra fire dragon heart, so I was able to make a fire dragon eye as well. So I was basically just searching for either one, swapping in between. I got lucky and ended up in another wizard's tower where I got even more affixes. Later that night, I found another pillager structure which was pretty small, and then decided to hop into this cooler looking roguelike dungeon. I grabbed everything I could from the first floor and then just decided to come home to put all these enchanted books away. I also got rid of all this random jewelry that I wasn't even using. The next morning, I enchanted a few tomes, and more importantly, I realized I had some extra ice dragon scales, so with those I made some more dragon forge blocks. I had just enough to make a core and another aperture. This completed the forge, and I placed my dragon down. Now I ended up having another issue. Even with these iron ingots and ice dragon blood, my dragon wasn't breathing ice into it. I remade this thing a few times and even tried to do it manually, but my dragon didn't even try breathing on it. My guess is that my dragon slayer level is too low, but I'm not sure. I spent the whole day troubleshooting my dragon. I even held the breathe button manually for a good amount of time and it still didn't do much. Eventually I scrapped the forge because I wanted to build it somewhere else. Day 124 to day 125, I remade the forge again right on top of the hill behind my base. This time I used a dragon staff to command my dragon to stay. Still, it wasn't working, so I tried one last thing. I redeemed these copper coins that I had trying to get a bunch of food items. I thought I needed to make my dragon larger, so I ended up getting more items and made some dragon meals. I fed my dragon until his health stopped increasing, so I'm assuming it was basically stage 5 now, and it still didn't use the forge. So once again, I put my dragon away and scrapped the forge. I then ended up going to the nether. I was just there to hopefully find some boss mobs. I ended up eventually finding a pretty big bastion. I was able to handle a lot of piglins on the walkways, and when I jumped into the center, they all came down and started attacking me. Luckily, I was able to push them off on the edge and make my way down to the loot area. This place had tons of gold blocks, and the chest had some ancient debris plus a golden hook, which apparently increases XP. Before equipping that, I opened all these nether buddy card packs, and that already filled up my binder a good bit. After running through this bastion, I managed to complete the whole nether set. Now this metal actually gives you complete fire resistance, which in my opinion is the best, but for now I just kept the end set metal on. I flew around the nether some more and found another stalwart dungeon. In here I just grabbed the tungsten ore and came home. That night I teleported around the desert area, and because of this chunk error, I noticed a huge fire dragon nest in this glitched cave. I broke down to get a good look and it was a huge fire dragon. To be safe, I ate an enchanted golden apple and jumped in. Immediately, I was able to reduce the dragon's health for a good amount of time. I managed to survive the onslaught until I was on the last layer of my hearts. This is when I recalled back home. Once I started healing, I came back, ate another golden apple, and tried again. This time, I ended up having the dragon's health one more time to around 140, but I was on 2 hearts and barely managed to survive. So after catching my bearings, I went back for the 3rd time, and the dragon just ended up being suffocated in the wall, so I couldn't even get the Dragon Slayer XP. This guy ended up dropping tons of dragon scales and a fire dragon egg as well. The next morning, I had this fire dragon egg in some burning netherrack and just waited for it to hatch. I slaughtered a bunch of my cows as well to get the dragon meal ready. As soon as this little guy hatched, I just kept it in my backpack for now. For the rest of these days, I went around the areas that the fire dragon was looking for some structures. I couldn't find any other dragons, but I did manage to clear this little pillager structure again. Later that night, while fighting this absolute unit of a boss, I started an undead army raid. Now, I hadn't faced these guys in master difficulty, so I had no clue what to expect. First, I put all of my effort into defeating this tank, which took forever, and once that guy was taken care of, I moved on to the undead mobs. Now, since I was in a weird biome, these guys all spawned in the weirdest areas, so it was super annoying to find them. I figured out that if you just wait a little, these mobs end up being highlighted, so that made clearing wave 1 much easier. Wave 2 started having enchanted mobs, but since I knew where these guys spawned now, I took care of them pretty easily. Wave 3 started in the morning, and this wave was surprisingly easy. Once again, the hardest part was just finding where these guys spawned. Wave 4 had even more enchanted mobs, but it was still super easy. Finally, on the last wave, these tankier and taller husks spawned, but they were super slow. Once I took all those guys out, I noticed there was 1 mob left. Now, this dude was legendary and had the most annoying legendary enchants. I somehow managed to crit it, I think, because it just ended up being taken out by that last shot. All these mobs already gave me tons of rewards, but I was looking for these treasure bags instead. Once everything was done, I came home, stocked up on more food, and disenchanted this smite sword. I placed down a few more graves and extracted the enchants off of my chest plate. Once that was done, I was able to enchant this brand new archmage robes with some really incredible stuff. That wasn't all though, I also made sure to put an affix that added 4 more hearts. With all that done, I then grabbed a tablet of scrying and ancient debris. This was because I needed a block of netherite for a new glyph. While looking for a place to mine, I actually ended up in a stalwart fortress, and this place had some really good loot in the chests. With the blazes here, I also managed to get tons of blaze rods and nether coins. There were even more rooms below the structure, which ended up also having even more of these weird blazes and even better chests. Once I cleared all of that, I found a nice area and dug down to y = 15. From here, I did the ritual and had 5 minutes to find as many ancient debris as possible. Since I now had the diamond paxel, I could end up vein mining these things as well. In total, I grabbed 45 pieces of ancient debris before coming home. As they were cooking, I used these nether coins for some XP and obsidian. Then I put mending on my paxel. In the morning, I used all of my netherite scrap to make ingots and turn those into 1 block of netherite. With that and some mythical clay, I put them in the glyph press and got Amplify 3. The first thing I did was put it into my launch spell, and now it launched me even further than ever. So with this new spell, I went into the end to try and get more mending gear. I ended up finding this end city type structure to start, and after looting that, I ended up near a end pyramid. Now this place always has the best loot. I ended up getting this artifact called a crystal heart, which increases my maximum health. Since this new artifact was replacing my obsidian skull, I swapped to my nether set metal as well. This was better because it gave me full fire resistance. Further into the end, I found a structure which had some really nice armor sets that I could scrap for later. I also ended up picking up these end shards, which become important later. It took absolutely forever, but I found another end city and I started clearing this entire place out. I put a bunch of these new books into the library and went to complete these Ars Nouveau quests, which were really easy. To end the night off, I made a cooking pot for some quest rewards, but once I looked at the recipes, I realized it was really useful now with this new food mod, so I set it up above my campfire. Day 131 to day 132, I decided to explore pretty far away, hoping to find some dragons again. Along my journey, I looted this sunken ship, cleared out a battle tower, and found a bunch of weird structures, like this one with an empty spawner in it. As it started turning dark, I found one of those homes again and met this dwarven trader. Since I had tons of coal, I traded with this guy and got some fey gems. Past this place, I made my way inside of a jungle Myrmec's nest and took out the workers plus the queen. I traveled the whole night, and in the morning I found a brand new structure. This was a pillager castle. Now this place had tons of enchanted vindicators. The most annoying guy here for sure was this legendary evoker. Everywhere I looked, there was like a new enchanted mob. These guys all dropped emeralds, which was pretty awesome. I was able to clear out the stragglers on the outside and then made my way into the structure. Everyone other than the legendary evoker was pretty easy to take care of. I ended up chasing this one dude around the whole time and managed to trap it. Then I focused my attack on the dude that was trapped, and with that guy taken care of, I cleared out the first floor. The second floor was pretty much the same, but there were no legendary mobs yet, which made the jobs much easier. I was able to loot this floor much faster and then completed a good amount of quests. But I was running out of food. I was still in the structure till the morning and things were going great until I got to the third floor. While I managed to take out 30 Vindicators, this legendary one spawned and it was way too strong. So I looted as many chests as I could and left. Along the way I found another pillager structure and this place was more like a camp. These mobs were significantly easier to take out and I was able to just roll through this place and grab all the chests. I also ended up getting the bad omen effect again and I activated this cool capsule thing that I got. So at this point I had that emblem on from my specialization, which gave my gathering XP a 300% boost. That plus these quest rewards boosted my gathering up 8 whole levels. As soon as I came home I had to stock up on food again, and after praying to the graves I put another skill point into the scribe skill, which maxed it out. With that being done, I scrapped a ton of gear and enchanted these archmage leggings with some really good enchants. I made sure to keep my old leggings to disenchant later. Day 134 to day 136, I put Vitae 5 on my leggings for more hearts and looked through my affixes. I couldn't really find good ones to put on, so I just moved on to these infinite dungeons. First one was called the Residence of Fortune. Before hopping in though, I found a new food to make. This beef stew thing was super easy to make and had tons of nutrients. I made sure to farm a ton of potatoes and gather more beef. The only issue for me was the mushroom now. My whole diet just ended up becoming pumpkin pies and beef stew. I also slaughtered too many cows, so I used like 2 stacks of copper coins to redeem 2 stacks of loot crates. I opened all of them and they filled my storage system up with tons of junk. With that done, I flew around a bit and I fought this mob who had beehive armor on. The next morning I had to clear a bunch of items, so I threw a bunch of things I didn't need into the lava pit. It was mostly the junk that I got from the crates. After a little bit of storage reorganizing, everything was cleaned up and ready to go. I then teleported far away to go dragon hunting some more. Just like the other times, I looted tons of random structures and even found a new area, which was for like a mini Cyclops. There were also a few wizards tower which gave me more affixes. And finally, after all of that, my fire dragon eye found something. I started digging down and saw the top of a dragon's nest, but I was attacked by a bunch of pretty strong mobs, so I had to recall home. After that, I went right back into it and lit that place up. This ended up being a red dragon and I jumped down doing tons of damage. At first, I felt pretty invincible since I was healing as well, but eventually this dragon got me to my final row of hearts, so I had to recall. The second time I withstood the dragon's attack and managed to take the whole thing out, which meant I got some Dragon Slayer XP as well. I didn't need the blood anymore, so I harvested the scales and looted everything else in the nest as well. Before the night ended, I extracted a rare affix and put that on my leggings, increasing the total armor rating. The next morning I did the exact same with another affix on my chest plate. Now this armor set was looking really good. I managed to put an extra affix on top of the chest plate, which increased the armor rating even more. Turns out I had tons of affix books that I could just use for the future. With all that done, I went out to explore one more time. I realized that one of these waystones was right in front of another dragon's nest. This one was an ice dragon and looked like it was only like tier 3, so I wiped it out pretty easily. I grabbed this thing's blood and noticed that it didn't even fully level up my dragon slaying level. During my travels, I found a few more structures. The first one was this really cool looking tree thing. In here, the chests were pretty good and the mobs were very easy to take out. Later that night, I found another one of those mushroom structures, which always had tons of food. Then behind that, it was that dwarven trader's house again, and this guy actually had a bunch of trades I could advance. I advanced it like 2 times, but then I ran out of Fey gems and this dude just wasn't restocking. To end the night off, I fought this boss mob who dropped a really nice helmet. Day 137, I went out exploring again and I found a cool mushroom village. Past that, I took out another battle tower and I ended up in a village. As I activated the waystone, I heard a dragon and it turned out that this dragon was fighting a Cyclops. As soon as that Cyclops died, I actually attacked the dragon and finished the job. This got me more skills and leveled up my Dragon Slayer up to 7. With this, I could finally use these dragon blood infused swords. I was hesitant on the lightning sword since it causes too many fires with the lightning strikes, so I stuck with the ice sword. Then to make things even more OP, I put a 23% attack speed affix on the sword, plus leeching 3, and my new favorite enchant, Perpetual Strike 8, which increases the damage with each hit. Day 138, I made these featherwhite ingots accidentally, but it did give me quest rewards. I could also use them to craft a better shelf of sight as well. While I was brewing these night vision potions, I was able to disenchant my old leggings. Then as I was doing that, another soul hit the grave, so I disenchanted my boots as well. Now that I got those enchantment books back, I was able to make a very overpowered set of Archmage boots. And on top of that, I even upgraded the protection on my chest plate and leggings. Even more, I was able to put Vitality 3 on my chest plate as well This all increased my hearts like crazy, and I ended up getting the Shelf of Masterful Sight as well. Later that night, I ended up putting 2 affixes into my boots, one increasing the armor rating and the other increasing my hearts. Before the night ended, I actually put an extra affix which increased the hearts on my leggings as well. With all this new stuff, I went out to look for stronger mobs to take out. I found Barako the Sun Chief almost immediately and took this guy out with a few hits only. Then with these quest rewards, I used them all on gathering XP. This was because I wanted to upgrade to a netherite Paxel soon. Once I was done with Barako, I found a pirate ship, and on top of the ship, I saw my first ultimate tier mob. This skeleton was the best way to check out this perpetual strike enchantment. I was able to hit it a bunch and my damage increased every hit. Once that was done, I made my way down to the main area of the ship and cleared this place out as well. The only thing left were the bottom 2 floors, and these chests had some pretty decent loot. I spent the rest of the day exploring, and at night I found these boss mobs. Then I landed on a battle tower which had a bunch of mobs piling up on the stairway. This is when I realized I didn't have sweeping edge on my sword. The next morning I went inside a roguelike dungeon to really test this armor out. No matter what happened though, my heart really wouldn't go under this specific level, so I was able to demolish this place with no issue at all. I got tons of levels and even completed a bunch of quests. The final floor actually had a boss chamber, and this guy was a breeze to take out as well. Day 141 to day 142, I decided to come back home and put all the books away. Then I extracted more affixes and used my bottles of XP. After that, I collected these quest rewards and used my coins. With the copper coins, I used it on 32 loot crates, and the monster coin, I put it into the 10 times reward. I also saw that I had an affix that increased my critical hit damage, so I put that on my sword plus sweeping edge 3. With all that done, I went out to explore till the morning. I ended up finding this really cool village that was built on top of trees. Past that, I found a pretty big jungle structure which had some maze-like areas and puzzles. I ended up having a fire resistance, so a lot of these traps didn't work, and I just broke into the final room, which was really nice. In here, there was an enchanted golden apple and blocks of diamonds and emeralds. Then, while traveling some more, I took out a lightning dragon and grabbed all of its scales. After that, I ended up in another one of those big binding structures. This place had some really strong mobs though. One of the zombies was legendary and it did a lot of damage, but it was even more scary since it also paralyzed me. Luckily, the launch spell worked, and after healing a bit, I came back to take out the top layer of enemies. This structure probably has some of the best loot imaginable. Every single chest was filled with rare ores and these tomes. I went down each floor, clearing out the mobs and looting the chests. Eventually, I had the entire main area cleared, so I just left, and when I came home, I scrapped a bunch of enchantments and made a soul campfire to get rid of these useless affixed gear. Day 143 to day 144, I sprinkled these soul braziers around the base as well, and then I started working on these dark magic quests. First thing I did was make this book, which started the entire chain. Then I made this apothecary stand and put it right next to my brewing stand. After that was done, I made some wooden altars and put rotten flesh into the blast furnace. I ended up making too many wooden altars since I had no clue what to do with them. I picked those things up for now and made 2 more items, a magic workbench and a crucible. I put the crucible on top of the campfire and put water in it. The first time I threw materials in it, my game crashed, so I had to remake these things, and this time I threw all the right materials in and started stirring. That ended up giving me arcane gold ingots. With that, I just made a basic amulet to start, and on the magic workbench, I made this thing called a mind shielding plate. No clue what it does, but my head slot was empty, so I equipped it. Once that was done, I made a few more random things for quest rewards and expanded a path towards all these new things. The next day, I went into the nether to look for 2 specific mushrooms so I could go into a nightmare dimension. This surprisingly took a long time. I was looking everywhere, and I even managed to loot an entire bastion. I went through a couple more structures as well, like this nether pyramid and a nether temple. It took a long time, but I found the 2 mushrooms and I made this thing called a strange bed. I hopped into the dimension by clicking on the bed, and this place was pretty creepy. There were some new mobs in here like this tormentor and apparently even Herobrine. Also, lightning strikes happen like crazy in this dimension, which meant this place would be perfect for farming boss mobs. I stayed here for a while just fighting legendary mobs, and I even fought an ultimate skeleton as well. Since I was done for now, I came home to enchant this archmage helmet. This thing ended up being stacked as well and only got better once I started adding affixes that increased the hearts. I only noticed this now, but the helmet actually had protection 8. To end these days off, I completed a new set of end quests, which involved me making a book, then a diamond hammer which I turned into a netherite hammer, and after that smashing these ender pearls on a thalassium anvil. That gave me ender dusts and I could complete even more quests. Final thing I did that night was set up a little ritual area just in case. Day 146, I made more pumpkin pies and used these sheep spawn eggs to fill out my pen again. Then with all these dungeon keys, I made a chest to organize them. I checked on a few keys that I didn't know about, and the ones that were technically finished, I put them into the chest. This nether one was kind of new, so I speed ran it really quick. This time though, I actually had a warped fungus on a stick, so I could complete this extra puzzle with a strider. There was another nether dungeon that I cleared out, and this one had a mimic, but for like the 9th time, I ended up getting the same bauble that I already had. Once morning hit, I also disenchanted my old helmet and went to check on these last 4 keys that I had left. I found a cool puzzle that lit up when I activated the jukebox, but it didn't do anything else new. All the other keys were just the old dungeons, so I inscribed like 4 more new keys and had to replace this inscribing station. So I'm just gonna skip over a bunch of these dungeons because they were all essentially the same. I really did try to get the blocks to upgrade the portal, but I couldn't find any one of those items. Instead, I got a ton of gear and enchanted books, which were nice. All that meant is that I couldn't use this one green key. Eventually, I called it quits and came home to put all these enchanted books away. I also made sure to cook more beef stew while I was here as well. On top of that, I could finally fill out the 10-time monster coin reward, and I put that XP into archery. To set up for the next adventure, I made an Everbright portal. I also hopped in really quick to check out the land and unlock the quest chain. Day 150 to day 151, my gathering level was finally high enough so that I could craft a netherite paxel. I made sure to disenchant my old paxel and stack this new one instead. With that done, I filled up on this beef stew and went into the end to look for these end shards as well. I looked through a ton of structures and went through every little cave in these end islands. The main spot you can get these shards from are the pyramids, I think. I spent about 40 minutes going through every single structure I could and looting these chests, hoping to find a bunch of these little end shards. I even made my way into some end fortresses as well. This entire trip got me like 1 end ingot and a few more shards, plus a firework star. With the firework star, I was able to make an AoE glyph. On top of that, I also made an explosion glyph as well. With those two, I crafted an exploding version of the harm spell, and it was working pretty well. I now had 4 ingots, so I turned my netherite armor into end armor, and it managed to be worse than my archmage armor, so I just kept it in my chest for now. The next morning, I cleaned my storage system up and opened a ton of these end buddy card packs. With that being done, I hopped into the Everbright to challenge my first Blue Skies boss. My regular sword was doing fine damage for now, so I just stuck with it. I grabbed all the keys like I've done a million times in this structure and went into the boss room. Now once again, this boss wasn't too hard. Its minions were super annoying though. Some of these golems ended up being enchanted and could paralyze me. Aside from that, I just played cat and mouse with the summoner and very slowly lowered its health. I got about halfway through its health and it took forever, so I had to swap to a Blue Skies weapon. I ended up choosing an Aquite sword. This sword helped just a little bit, but it still ended up taking a good bit longer. Eventually though, I had taken the summoner out and learned some valuable lessons. This loot bag was pretty good and the arc increased my speed. The quest rewards were also really nice, and before challenging the next dude, I stocked up on more food. Day 153 to day 154, I ended up taking a little detour and made this thing called an undead battle standard, which summons the undead army. I found a nice plains biome and spawned this army once again. This time, it was much easier since I could see most of the enemies in the plains. I got rid of the first 2 waves and even traded with a wandering trader to get this iron hide amulet, which took up an artifact slot. As it was turning dark, I got up to wave 4 and it was getting a little more tough since more and more mobs spawned. One of these mobs was also legendary, so I had to be very careful. But once that monster was taken care of, I cleared wave 4 in no time. Wave 5 ended up being significantly easier since there were no legendary mobs, and I defeated this army really quickly to get my treasure bags. For my food though, I now had 2 limiting factors. I kept running out of potatoes and mushrooms. The potatoes I just used bone meal to farm, but for the mushrooms I hopped into the nether. I got very unlucky since I went through a bunch of different biomes and couldn't really find anything. Eventually I found an area that had grown brown mushrooms, so I harvested a bunch of those. Finally, I could make more beef stew. To end the night off, I opened some capsules. One of them gave me blueprints to my own castle, but this second one was just a complete 9x9 farm. So I cleared out an area next to my base and activated the capsule, which just plopped down a structure. I made sure to light that area up and connected it to my base with a path. Day 155 to day 157, I did some light decorating around the new farm and traded with this goblin trader. I got a stack of randomite ores and some iron coins. After that, I decided to harvest all the crops in this new farm, and it was a really good amount of crops as well. Once that was done, I placed all 64 of these randomite ores. All this was very satisfying and leveled up my mining and gathering skills a bunch. Once that was done, I inscribed a new key, and this dungeon actually looked kind of new. So I hopped in 10, and of course, it was only the main room that was different. The rest of the puzzles were pretty much the same. I made sure to empty this cow spawner room though. Once I finished everything, I came home to use 64 copper coins on these choice rewards. There wasn't anything good, so I just chose the coal. I ended up deploying even more ore capsules, which leveled up my skills again after I mined them. To complete some more quests, I made an altar of the sea. Now this thing takes 4 enchanted gear and recycles it into random enchanted books. The only catch is that it takes a bunch of levels to finish the ritual. I did it with a few more items and then went underground to grab some ores. This was all just to complete some basic quests like making a pickaxe and some armor with different materials. I slowly worked my way all the way up from iron to emerald gear, and then it turned out I needed to make an endstone smelter. To make these emerald ingots, you need to alloy tin ingots and emerald blocks. I needed one more tin ingot, so I went underground. It took a while, but I found some tin and crafted the emerald pickaxe. To complete the whole quest chain, I made a netherite pickaxe as well. Before the night ended, I expanded my beacon by another layer. Day 158 to day 160. Finally, after being stocked up with food, I enchanted this aquite sword, which ended up being a mistake since this new boss is weak to axes. I quickly hopped into the Everbright and grabbed some of these logs as well. Then I made my way towards this nature dungeon. It took me a pretty decent amount of time to get all the keys, but I was set to take on the Starlight Crusher. I hopped into the boss room and immediately realized that swords would not work properly on this guy at all. So I grabbed and made some extra blue skies axes to help break down the walls. This fight was super repetitive. All I had to do was just wait for this guy to stop attacking once in a while and hit it. Then all I had to do was break down its walls whenever it came up. I repeated that hundreds of times and eventually had to swap to this enchanted axe that I picked up in the dungeon. This one barely did more damage. Once the crusher's health got to around 25%, it started moving out of the center and laying down outside. Here, my sword was able to do even more damage than the axe. Slowly but surely, I took care of this monster as well, and I picked up the best arc from the loot bag. The nature arc provides 2 extra hearts. Day 161 to day 163, that boss fight took all of my food, so I had to restock. And while looking around, I noticed I had an extra diamond coin. So I tried to look up what artifact would work for me, but I'd already filled out most of the slots. So I chose this superstitious hat, which is supposed to apply an extra level of looting on killed enemies. As soon as I was done, I flew around looking for the blue skies buildings to hopefully get some lunar stone bricks. Along the way, I found a pillager windmill which looked really cool. There was an ultimate zombie right in front of it though. While fighting this tank, a bunch of pillagers decided to pop up out of hiding, but I was still able to take out every single mob. The windmill itself had even more pillagers. Those guys are pretty easy to beat. The bottom floor was where all these mobs piled up. Once I cleared that place out, I started looting, and since I knew there was a TNT trap here, I tried to remove some of the redstone, but that activated the trap. This blew up a good portion of the basement, so I went back up to loot the rest of the structure. As soon as I was done, I went into the nearest roguelike, and this place also had a boss spawner as well. Once I defeated the boss, it dropped an ancient level gear. The rest of the dungeon was very easy, even with these random structures connected to it. I grabbed literally everything I possibly could and recalled back home. To remove one of these ancient affixes, I put an older ancient gear in a soul campfire. Then I combined this ancient shard with this book of scrapping so I could remove an ancient affix from one of these gear. It's a little complicated, but it all makes sense. This affix happened to be not that good. With that done, I made a portal to the Twilight Forest as well, and finally learned that you can craft an obsidian skull, so I combined that with a cobalt shield, and then finally made an Ankh shield. I kept that thing in one of my slots. Day 164 to day 166, before I hopped into the Twilight Dimension, I made sure to enchant this shield that I was using. With this and tons of food, I was finally ready. I flew around this beginning area and found the first boss really quickly. This was the Naga, and it only took like a few seconds before this thing was completely gone. I grabbed my quest rewards from this boss and moved on to the next one. Now this boss was a Twilight Lich, and I made my way into its castle. The loot here was pretty good, so I started from the bottom looting as many rooms as I could. Once I made it to the top, it was then time to fight the Lich. Now this boss was pretty unique. It summons a bunch of clones, and you have to smash each one of their shields by hitting the ender pearls back at them. This one took me a little to get right, but once the clones were gone, I easily got rid of the Lich. The quest rewards from this guy were pretty incredible. Next up, I looked for a swamp biome to fight the Minnow Shroom. I found the maze and hopped into it. Down here, I fought a legendary Minotaur who was stronger than all of the bosses I've faced so far. I ended up getting deeper into this structure and found tons of mushrooms. Finally, I saw the Minnow Shroom and took it out very easily while it was distracted. Then with all this meat stroganoff, I needed to turn my feeding upgrade off so that I could eat it eventually. I had to teleport home though since I couldn't find my way back. Once I got back into the dimension, I ended up in a dark forest. This structure was for the night phantoms and it was massive and confusing. I was here for literally forever. Then when I made it to the night phantoms, one of them was legendary, and I noticed that my sword with the freezing effect just ended up sending these guys down to bedrock. So it took me even longer to beat these guys as I'd have to wait for them to come back up. Eventually, I took care of them and got the trophy plus the quest reward. So I had already eaten the stroganoff, but I decided to take on the Urghast first. This was by far the worst boss battle I've ever done. First of all, this Urghast was enchanted with lively, which meant it regenerates health. I managed to lure it in once and then do tons of damage to it, but then it just vanished out of nowhere. Turns out this dude was just chilling underneath the main building, regenerating health for the absolute longest time. The only thing I could do was just launch over to the Urghast and hit it once in a while. I did that for literally forever, and you couldn't even build close to it either, so I was out of reach to spam attack it. I toughed it out though and took this mob out, and then I grabbed all of its reward from the chests and the quest reward as well. Day 169 to day 170, I took a quick break to scrap some more armor and redeem my coin rewards. From the monster coins, I got a pretty decent bow and I decided to enchant it. It took a little bit of work, but when I put the enchanted books on it, it ended up being incredible. This was basically perfect for the new boss, who was the Hydra. Now this is by far the coolest looking boss in the mod, but it still really wasn't a threat. And similar to the Lich, all I had to do was just launch its own projectile back at it. I kept firing these arrows, but paid real close attention to when it launched fireballs, because those do tons of damage to it. In record time, this boss was taken care of, and I decided to strip its lair clean from all the ores in the walls. Next boss was the Alpha Yeti, who spawns in an ice cave. This dude was an absolute cakewalk, and I'm pretty sure it didn't even land a hit on me. I think the next one was the final real boss. It was the Snow Queen, and she's in the Aurora Palace. I ended up picking just one corner here at random and broke into it. Turns out I guessed right and landed right on top of the Snow Queen. All I had to do now was wait for the Snow Queen to come down so I could do tons of damage. Lucky for me, my sword somehow froze the boss and she never really flew back up, so I was able to take her out quickly. That basically completed all of the bosses, and the next ones weren't really fights. All I had to do was basically find a Twilight Highlands biome and then dig down into a cave. After lighting up and clearing the area, I opened this small obsidian box and grabbed a magic bean from the chest inside. With my break spell though, I could actually break into the larger obsidian box as well, and I grabbed the lamp of cinders. To complete the quests, I planted the magic beans down and went up to the clouds to pick up a giant sword and a pickaxe. This basically completed the entire mod, and I made my way over to the final tower, which gave me another quest reward. Day 171, as soon as I came back home, I equipped this thing called a Caged Heart, which reduces a bunch of damage. Then I summoned one of these old bosses again, and my ice sword kind of glitched it pretty hard, so I had to resummon it and beat it with another weapon. Now I was using my bow and scythe, so I was able to properly take this guy on for the second time. This was all just to make this item called a Slicer's Dice, which could sometimes increase damage. I also summoned this thing called a Swamp Jaw again, and this guy only took like 3 arrows to beat. I needed to make an item called a Bone Raker from its loot. That was supposed to increase my attack damage also. Before the night ended, I also grabbed like 64 more loot crates and opened them all up. Day 172 to day 174, I cleared an area out behind my base and used some of these capsules, and they all happen to just be little structures. After that, I decided to use some of these castles blueprints and messed up putting them down. These ones, for some reason, you couldn't redeploy. I had to remove one of these things manually, but the next one I opened on top of the previous structure. After a little bit of adjustment, it actually looked decent. I moved on and decided to cut up more of these buddy cards to make buddy steel blends. First up, I made a block of Luminous 2, which completed a quest, and then while the buddy steel was smelting, I did an enchanting ritual to make a potion flask. This thing can hold tons of potions, so I started brewing more mana regen potions as well. As that was going on, I made a dull trinket and did an even bigger enchanting ritual to make an amulet of mana regen. I also learned about this potion jar thing, which I stocked up with these mana regen potions that I was brewing. Turns out you could also enchant this flask as well, so I made 8 glyphs of extend time on the glyph press. With this thing upgraded, any potion in the flask was extended by 50%. The next morning, while I was still brewing mana regen potions, I decided to put some affixes on my bow. The first one increased draw speed and the second one increased sniper damage. More importantly, I put this enchant on called Endless Quiver, which was just a better form of infinity. Finally, with this potion jar filled up, I could also fill up my flask. Day 175 to day 178, I went out to explore, and with all this mana regen, I could use even more spells. I ended up raiding another wizard's tower and dove into a roguelike dungeon. Now that I could spam this this break spell, I was breezing through this place even faster than I usually would. I even wiped the boss mob out super easily. As I got to the final few floors, I found another boss spawner, and of course this guy was no match for me. The only thing that put up a fight was this legendary spider, and that's because of the bleeding effect it caused. I cleaned out this dungeon and came home to put some affixes on my sword. With that done, I collected more quest rewards and recycled some more gear that I had. This is when I tried to get a new item. It was called a phantasmal ingot, and it had a 2.5% drop rate from ghosts. The only reliable way I knew to get ghosts to spawn were from these haunted chests. So I went to the graveyard and constantly kept opening the chest to spawn more and more ghosts. The first time though, I realized my ice sword would just glitch these mobs out. So the next day, I enchanted a scythe and spammed these ghosts like crazy. I mean, I fought like hundreds of these guys. A lot of them were enchanted, which made them a little bit harder, and the rest were just normal. I spent the whole day here and finally got one of these ingots to drop. With that, I made a phantasmal blade, which had a special attack as well. I then got rid of all these enchants on my old sword and put them into this one. Day 179 to day 182, I went into the Atum dimension again to defeat some pharaohs. I already had a bunch of Nebu torches, so I could get into the main rooms pretty quickly. The first pharaoh I defeated dropped 2 necklaces. The next pharaoh was a little harder, but it dropped something that I already had. The very next pyramid though was back to being easy, and once again I got the same necklace I already had one more time. Finally though, in the pyramid right after, I managed to get something new. I got 2 feet of autumn. With all that done, I came home to use all these coins I had gathered again and decided to farm chickens since all of my sheep disappeared. I also picked up this everlasting beef artifact and cooked it to get eternal steak. That night while fighting some mobs, I started an undead army right behind my base. I think at this point the mod pack was almost breaking since I could see the spawners that brought these mobs out. Well anyway, it took the whole night and a little bit of the morning for me to defeat this raid, but it was super easy, and these raids always give a ton of loot, so they're usually worth it. Next up, I went into the nightmare dimension and bought a ton of mobs, but I was looking for Herobrine. It took a little bit, but I found him and beat Herobrine with just a few hits. Day 183 to day 185, I noticed that there was an achievement for defeating 16 undead army raids, so I made a whole bunch of summons and started challenging them. It took me almost a whole day to defeat one of these raids on this frozen lake, so I knew I was in for some crazy challenge. I fought 2 legendary mobs in this little icy area at that night, and as the night was ending, this next guy, who was also legendary, was an absolute tank and got me down to my last row of hearts. Once I took care of that, I went into the plains and summoned another undead army. This one actually ended up being really quick since it was in a plains biome and I could see most of the mobs. I fought another raid that night and it extended till the morning, but as soon as I finished it, I just tapped out. These things just took way too long. At least the loot was always solid though. In the meantime, I scrapped some gears, removed some affixes, and made a bunch of end crystals. Day 186 to day 188, I quickly went into the nether to do the scrying ritual again. This gave me tons of ancient debris. I ended up doing the ritual like 2 times, so I had a stack and a half of ancient debris when I was done. I tried looking for another goblin trader, and during the search, I took out a bone serpent and raided a bunch of structures. I also cleared another treasure bastion, which had some insane loot in the center. I didn't have any luck on the goblins, so I came home and put the ancient debris into the endstone smelter. These things always manage to give you 1 extra netherite scrap. So a good bit of netherite cooked, but I think I had some sort of brain damage or something because I decided to make a glyph of Amplify 3 again. Since I already knew this spell, I just wasted an entire block of netherite. Anyway though, I decided to make a pretty overpowered heal spell instead. The next morning, I decided to use all the coins that I had, and this time I ended up having some gold coins as well. I also had 32 iron coins, and I was able to open a ton of these uncommon loot crates. Then once I fed these chickens, I got this really cool little relic. It was an idol of fertility. So with all these new blocks of netherite, I was still short 5 blocks, but I did get to put in an extra stack upgrade though. Day 189 to day 191, a grave guardian spawned, so I tried to advance its trades as much as possible. After that, I found a way to turn spirit orbs into emeralds. Turns out you could just turn your stamina vessel into emeralds through the curse statue. Then of course you could just get the stamina vessel right back using the regular statue with spirit orbs. So I did that a bunch of times to get a ton of emeralds. Once I ran out of spirit orbs, I made my way towards the end dimension to summon the ender dragon a bunch of times. I got kind of sidetracked though because I had to fight a bunch of these endermen first. Once I took care of most of them, I put the crystals in the center and realized I had something else to worry about. These shulkers sometimes break the crystals before the dragon even manages to summon. I didn't realize that until I wasted like 8 crystals. At this point, the mod pack was basically breaking down though, and it spawned the end pillars even higher. That didn't really matter though since I could fly, and I broke them all down anyway. With that taken care of, I beat this dragon pretty easily. These end treasure bags roguelikes are by far the best. While being very careful, I had just enough crystals to summon 3 more dragons. I did just that, and one by one defeated each dragon for their loot. I got up to level 117 and decided to come home. My goal was actually to beat the dragon a bunch more times to get the advancement, but it wasn't working out too well. To end these days, I collected a bunch of quest rewards and even made this ghast gate pearl. So I went into the nether to fight waves of ghasts for their tears. I fought up to wave 4 and then ended up running out of time. Day 192 to day 200. I put all these days together because the game started crashing a lot and being pretty unstable. So first up, I found lunar stone bricks in a blue sky structure. With that, I built the Everdawn portal and hopped in. I then went to look for the blinding tower, and it actually took a good amount of time to find. Once I got inside, I grabbed this spear and all the keys. I went in to challenge the alchemist right after that. Now this guy was supposed to do poison damage, but I was immune to all that. This ended up being another one of those cat and mouse games, and eventually I just cleared this dungeon out as well. I got the Dusk Arc, which wasn't that good. The next structure though was the Poison Dungeon, and I think it might be the largest. I made sure to enchant a new Blue Skies weapon though before I hopped into this dungeon. After what seemed like forever, I got 4 keys and was in the Arachnarch's lair. Now this guy was enchanted, but somehow it was still easier than the Starlit Crusher. I just had to keep swapping between my sword and bow over and over again. It took a little bit, but with this guy taken care of, I got the Poisonous Arc, which is completely useless to me. But on the bright side, I did manage to complete a majority of quests in this mod pack. There were only a few more things left for me to do, and one of them was to get a coconut. These items were all required to make a pina colada and a white chair. Once I sat on the chair and drank the drink, I got teleported to the tropics. Now this dimension was meant to be relaxing, but they still had tons of mobs spawning. I ended up returning home though, since there was still one major enemy left for me. I stocked up on water breathing potions and filled up another potion jar with them. After that, I found an ocean monument and went in to defeat the Elder Guardians. Thankfully, with my Ankh shield, I wasn't affected by mining fatigue at all. This place was pretty confusing, but eventually I found my first Elder Guardian and wiped it out. I opened the treasure bag and fought another one of these guys. One more left to go, but this one was being defended by a legendary guardian who did a great amount of damage to me. Once that little guy was taken care of, I defeated the final Elder Guardian as well. The next day, I went to challenge a Gorgon as well and put a blindfold on. Since the Ankh shield prevents blindness, I could still see perfectly. I grabbed the Gorgon's head after I took it out, and while messing around in my base, I accidentally used it on my armor stand, which basically turned my end armor into stone. As day 200 was nearing, I ended up using every single one of my coins. I made sure to use some of the rarer coins to fill out all these artifact slots in my inventory. To finally end the journey, I killed a bunch of chickens to feed my fire dragon, and I was finally able to ride this thing too.